All right, welcome everybody. This is the monthly gathering call. Some of you know me. I've seen you before. I know your name and your face, and I'm Samantha Moe. I'm a certified parenting coach, and I host these monthly gathering calls to create a safe space for us as parents to talk about what's happening in our homes. Now, I've been really inspired these past few months from reading a book about the dark side of parenting. I know that personally, when I'm in my role as a parenting coach, I'm offering tools and encouragement and some information that helps you see your child's gifts and draw out your child's gifts. But I also think it's important to see and acknowledge the gifts that you're bringing to the table. So you might be coming here wired a little bit like me in some ways. You might be type A. Shout out to somebody I know on the call here. You might like to get things done, check things off of your list. You're managing a lot of things in your life. Yeah, I see your thumbs up. And some of you might be coming here not because you have that type of personality and you're looking for more ease in parenting and like to make it feel really luscious and all those things you wanted it to be in the first place, but because you're looking for ways to um, help you and your child flow better together, have better listening, more collaboration, fewer behaviors, meltdowns, tantrums. At this time of year, it's always really classic that people are here to ask me questions about the school transition, setting kids up for success, making right decisions. And maybe you're here because you've had a tough experience at this time of year, if we're talking about school in the past, and you want it to go smoother and it hasn't been going smoothly yet. Or maybe you're here because um, you haven't had a transition like this in the past and you're trying to stack the cards in your child's favor in terms of setting routines and not having arguments. There could be components of their sensory system that you want to make sure are working so that they can really thrive this school year. I love September back to school as much as I love New Year's because it can really feel like that fresh beginning. And so I'm glad you're here. Thank you. Thank you for coming. To share just a brief bit of background so you know why I'm going to be sharing some of the tools with you that are relevant this time of year, and know where I'm coming from is that I have a master's degree in communication disorders 20 years ago, U of M, and Minnesota is the M in that M sentence acronym. Um, and I specialized in communication disorders. So my very first job, and I would even say my very first frustration, was at an autism school in Southern California, where I was tasked with helping kids transition from the school classroom to my speech therapy office to teach them how to make friends. How do you do back and forth conversation? How can I break this down into steps so that they can thrive? And I remember within months at this job, having my hand on the door to the third grade classroom and just being filled with dread because there was one child in the school of kids age 3 to 22 who all qualified with an autism diagnosis that was my most challenging person to do social skills work or play or training with. And I remember using all of my tools of persuasion and like being calm and taking deep breaths, kind of like trying not to enrage an angry dog that you don't know, where I'm like, okay, what do I do to not tip this child over the edge? And while we successfully got out of the classroom and I'm 10 steps away and feeling really um, grateful and glad, like hope is rising, like today's going to be the day where I don't have to worry about setting this child off. We get 10 steps, 9 steps, 8 steps away, and the child melts down and he's on the floor, kicking and screaming. And I'm looking around, feeling concerned that the teachers are judging me. Am I going to help this kid meet his goals? What did I sign up for? Have you had a moment like this? Like parents, right? This moment of doubt. Would I have even really done this if I knew it was going to be this hard? The sweat dripped down my back. And I just admitted, I just like flag up in the air. While I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And in that moment, It was 20 years ago. I was in my 20s, so I just bribed Charlie and brought him back to the classroom. But when I went back to my office and turned the lights off and put my head in my hands, I had this wrestling moment of what am I going to do? How am I going to make this better? I can't do this my entire life. I am not equipped for this, even though I had 6 years of education. And thank goodness I heard my mother's voice in my head. Thank goodness, right? You know, those moments of despair where you can't think of anything else and there's no silver lining that you can think of. But my mom's voice came into my head. And I grew up here in Minnesota, where I live again now, in a family of 7. So I have 4 siblings. And my mom Cheryl's voice said, Samantha, every child has gifts. You can learn to draw them out. And I thought about it and I thought, every child has gifts. And I heard her voice, you can learn to draw them out. And that's why, really, friends, I know some of your videos are off. That's why I'm here today, because that messaging that I received as a child, amidst some hardship, quite honestly, in our family dynamic, equipped me to see and really believe that even in cases that historically were defined as being tough behavior and mood and emotional situations based on certain diagnoses, the truth is still there that kids have gifts. And that's like the beacon that I strive towards with all of the work that I do. And that's the hat that I offer to you today when we start looking at what kind of behavior you're seeing. I also want to offer to you that the hope in this situation is when you have the tools to help your child regulate, calm their behavior, listen, prevent behavior, now you get to bring out the gifts that you were born with, that you were equipped with. And sometimes this might be the type A, organized nature. You get your kid enrolled in all of these activities and find out where they really thrive. I think of a video I watched once of a kid with ADHD who got called to stay after school, and the child was nervous, like, I'm going to get in trouble again because I'm always like tapping my fingers on the table and I'm always like jiggling my foot under my desk. And the teacher looks him seriously in the eye and he says, son, I don't think the problem is that you have ADHD. I think the problem is that you're a drummer and you don't have drumsticks. And he handed him sticks. This is a true story. And so this teacher saw the child's gifts outside of diagnoses, outside the things we as parents say in our head about, oh, my kid's manipulating me, controlling me. Oh, they're so defiant again. I want to help you see their gifts because I think it's one of the greatest joys is when we can have peace at home. And so you get, like, my professional context is that I've created a parenting curriculum called Mad to Glad Blueprint. And it's 8 pillars of parenting that you can use to regulate a child's brain, really, so that they have calmer behavior and not so much fight or running away, hiding from you, or screaming or ignoring you, like this shut down, freeze behavior. And instead, what you start seeing is this interactive relationship, no matter what their diagnosis might be. And again, in case you didn't know, for this work that you're going to hear bits of today with these 8 pillars of parenting and how to like really dive in beneath behaviors, I get hired by autism and children's mental health agencies to train their staff so that, like here in Minnesota, we have a company called Fraser and Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health. Shout out, I see another familiar name on the call. Hello. Hire me to train their parent coaches and mental health providers to be able to then them run this parenting curriculum on site, because it's shown to improve children's well-being and communication and self-control so that they can really thrive. So if you've ever had this moment, if I painted that picture well enough for you, where you're looking at a kid who's having a meltdown and you're like, I should be navigating this situation better than I am. I mean, these are the thoughts that I was having, but here I am, there's a kid yelling at me and I don't know what to do. The messaging here today during this gathering call is you're not alone. And the beauty that I have from working with over 1,000 families, translating my curriculum into other languages, certifying, closing in on 100 professionals now in Mad to Glad curriculum, is that there are some really specific things that we can do in order to take steps in the right direction, and change happens quite quickly in the family dynamic. Even if you've worked with 3, 4, 14 other practitioners, mental health providers, talk to the pediatrician, the school social worker, maybe there's somebody giving you probiotics, a naturopath, a homeopath, a chiropractor, like working on gut health or sensory integration. This is the hub, this is the gathering where we get to have a tender space for us parents to say, what's going on? Let's break it down. Let's find our starting point. And if we need more, I have a whole program, and I'm happy to share what that looks like towards the end if that's of interest. And I'm just looking at my calendar. I lead my program twice a year, and October is one of the starting points. So I'm happy to talk about that later if that's relevant. So I want to hear from you all before I go into a couple of tools to get us all on the same page of what's going on beneath behaviors and connect some dots that may not have been connected for you before, to understand why it's important that you sign up for this call. So if you're willing to type in the chat box, that's the best way to do it as we're getting started and getting to know each other here. Why is it important for you to be here today? And note that I did see some of you fill out the form, so I recognize your names, and I'm picturing the ages of your kids and some of the things you wrote down, but this one-liner will be really helpful to gather us as a community. All right, so some of the common things, some of you are sending me this privately. Okay, you can send it to everyone, or you could put it privately. So it's important for you to be here because you want to understand your child. You want better bedtime routines so that school transition can go off without a hitch. Less defiant behavior. Yep, I hear that. And Jason, I hear it's important because you want to be successful and help build the relationship between your child. Yeah, I love to say modern day parenting is meaningful, not mean, right? Like, no, none of you are here because you're looking to do the old parenting paradigm of authoritarian. And I say it's old, it's actually still really common in many cultures and many locations. But the authoritarian paradigm is, I'm the boss, I'm in charge, you will obey me, you're the kid. And that what we find doesn't work with particular types of personalities. You're going to get more fight behavior. Or for a personality like mine, as a kid, I grew up with more of a pleaser personality. I was the 4th kid out of 5. So I was like the harmonizer, almost like the middle kid. And I don't know what happened in my 30s, but there was a lot less pleasing and a lot more speaking up for myself, thank goodness. But we can't raise our kids the way where we crush their spirit or push them away, because there's so many outside influences with peers and digital media and access and strangers, where it's like the heart, the body, the brain in the human development is such that we look for belonging. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says like that's the root, is belonging, and we don't have tribes and villages and clans anymore, unfortunately, where you have that deep sense of belonging. And so what you get to do is you get to create a culture in your home, if you know how, so that your child seeks you, not just for processing their emotions, but talking things through. And of course, it matters how old your kid is. My 4-year-old doesn't talk things through as much as, a 14-year-old is going to talk things. Well, even then, teenage autonomy, they're not really going to talk things through with you yet anyway. They're trying to separate importantly and necessarily. But then like your 9-year-old who hasn't hit that stage yet. All right, Connie, I got you. Learn, learn, learn. Thanks for being here. And Sydney, you like to have the ideas and guidance top of mind, so the meetings help. Glad to see you again. Trisha, help your child learn the coping skills he needs to navigate life. Yeah, I know. And we're tired of being tired. I got all of that. Good. Thank you all. So we're going to talk about what's happening with kids' behavior. I'm going to call this fire in the brain. I'm just going to give you a snippet of it. And then we're going to talk about how our kids' behavior influences our parenting, so that we're not just shining the spotlight on our kid, but what's happening with us. This is the parenting space. And this is one of the most beautiful parts about me leaving the field of speech language pathology is that this is the space for you to come when you know you have an influence on your child and it might not be the influence you're hoping to have on them. I always think it's um I'm not always sure about that statement, like, well, my kid lets down and lets it all out because they feel safe with me. Well, sometimes that's happening. That's true. Like I let it all out with my husband because I feel safe with him. But sometimes mm, a kid lets it all out because, if you've ever had a really great school teacher for your child, and you're like, man, my kid just thrives during the day and they come home happy and they're tired and they need to like talk things through, but they're not melting down and showing a lot of anxiety or resistance to going back to school. It's because that teacher is using a style that helps their brain feel calm and safe to thrive. And so sometimes if you have a child, I think back to my fourth grade teacher, I cried every day for the first 4 months of school because my teacher was really strict. And at that time, I was so sensitive. My siblings would tease me, oh, there's Sammy. She's so sensitive. She's crying again. Um, Sometimes it's at the match of the adult style. Like I felt like my spirit got crushed in that moment. I didn't feel seen and heard in the way that I needed to be held really tenderly. And so if you're here and you've heard somebody try to encourage you by saying, well, your child's melting down because they feel safe with me, I'm not going to say that. Now, I love you, and there's no judgment here at all. But sometimes kids are melting down because there are some certain tools that others have that we don't. And let's dive into some of those. Let's look at what those tools can be. So, to set the foundation for all of us, I want to share with you my screen to let you see that when we're talking about challenging behaviors, there is a leader in the neuroscience world named Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's written many books, one of them called Whole Brain Child. And he talks about the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. So the downstairs brain is responsible for fight, flight, or freeze, and the upstairs brain is responsible for higher cognition, solving problems, paying attention for an extended period of time, managing your own behavior. So if you think about fight, flight, or freeze, I want you to type in the chat box, what is it that you know, just so I can poll you. What do you know? What have you heard about fight, flight, or freeze? And as you're typing, I'm going to keep talking. Because from a brain science perspective, what Dr. Daniel Siegel has identified is that, of course, this is our primitive protection part of our development, and it's early developing in the womb. So, or as a fetus. So, if a bear was chasing you in the woods, then you would have a fight response, maybe, if you're wired that way. You would have a flee response, run away. And I'm literally going to Montana next week and I was looking up YouTube videos. Okay, black bears can climb trees, grizzly bears cannot climb trees. So you might have a flight free response if you're in danger, or a freeze response. So freeze looks like kind of like that, right? I'm picturing a kid I worked with in a private school setting. She was 5 years old, and the parent said, I don't know, she's having a hard time making friends. And I went and did an observation, and she literally stood on the playground and she had a little quiver. If you've ever felt that adrenaline shake in your body. And the teacher said, oh, she's just going to take a long time to warm up. And I said, no, she's in freeze. And she had some early life trauma in the NICU and her birthing experience. And she had a processing delay where it took her 5 seconds to answer any question in a quiet room. And you imagine all these 5-year-olds running around climbing on the playground. And she was having a freeze response of overwhelm as if she was in survival. There was no bear chasing her in the woods. Or I'm thinking about Charlie melting down on the floor, kicking and screaming. He was fighting. He wasn't having he was reacting to me as if I was a bear chasing him in the woods. And we get these situations and we put other labels on them. Meltdowns, defiant, slow to warm up. And when we start looking at brain science, we're like, well, actually, yes, Trisha, they're showing behaviors that is their response to stress. That's their brain response to stress. And if you're really up on it, if you've done some reparenting, trauma healing work of your own, you might know the word fawn. So there's the fourth F, the fawn response, which is smile and nod. And you're like, why did I do that? Why didn't I speak up for myself? And that could be that could be your stress response. And you want to understand this when you're parenting your child, and this is the root of any suggestion that I'm going to give you or not give you really, is that if the downstairs brain is activated by any symptoms you might be seeing, screaming, cursing, slamming their door, burying themselves in screens, withdrawing, running away, swiping things off school desks, curling under tables, straight up ignoring you, like all of these different behaviors that we see, what's happening in the brain is adrenaline and cortisol are being released, and they're just using their limbs and their words and their body to show you the downstairs brain is activated. And I call this fire in the brain. I call this fire in the brain. No question mark after that. It's called fire in the brain because it's like there's a fire in your child's brain. And if you want them to reach these upstairs level skills that we all want our kids to reach, I think about Charlie with problem solving. I would squat down and be like, Charlie, what could you do right now instead of yelling, I hate you? I would literally say that. Like I would try to get him to do some problem solving. My 4-year-old was screaming because he didn't want to do quiet time yesterday with the nanny. And I could hear like, oh, don't scream right now. Don't scream right now. What can you do? And he just couldn't. His brain was on fire. He had fire in the brain. So problem solving in the moment isn't going to work. And that's literally because neuroscientists call this the staircase in the brain. So if your downstairs brain is running the show, it floods all of this and there's no access. So problem solving is not aware in the moment. And this can be really perplexing because you might have a child who, you see this even as 3-year-olds. They have really interesting, 3 and 4-year-olds have interesting conversations with us. And you're like, oh, you're really thinking things through. And of course, by the time they're 9 or 16 years old, you're like, you have a lot of thinking skills. But in the moment, if a child is wiped out by anger or anxiety, they can't access problem solving. They also don't have access to being able to pay attention. So imagine me, Charlie, look at me, check my eyes, look at me. I'm trying to talk to you. Let's talk about what we need to do here. That skill doesn't work in the moment. Or managing behaviors. So I have a good friend, Kathy Flaminio, who does great mindful work here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul schools and hospitals and juvenile systems. And she's so good at like, you can take out the breathing ball and it shows you to take deep breaths because it expands. And these are amazing tools to practice with your kid, but unless you're very skilled in the moment when your child has fire in the brain, you know what Charlie's going to do if I'm a newbie using this tool? He's going to take that ball and he's going to throw it at me. And so you want to understand that there's fire in your child's brain beneath behaviors and that there are certain types of brains that are wired to be more intense. Why are they more intense is another conversation. Maybe we'll go into that, but not for purposes of tools today. We don't have to know why. But if you have a child with more emotional intensity, you know it because they're controlling and they're demanding of you. Their triggers can be confusing. So you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid more meltdowns and tantrums. And they like a banana today and they don't like it tomorrow. And what are you, like the school routine's going great and we have a poster spelled out, but now this thing triggered them. So it can be an emotional trigger that's confusing, but it could also for sure be sensory triggers, right? Like the tag on the back of the shirt, the seam on the sock lined up just right, or having seamless socks, the noise in the low frequency echoing sounds in bathrooms or overhead noises. And we also know that you have a child with more fire in the brain and probably some patterning around that, like some deep patterning that makes their personality seem intense. And I'm saying this intentionally because this can shift. So it looks like this is their personality, but it can change. But you know that they have more of this wiring when their emotional responses or behavior reactions are intense. And if they're up here with fire in the brain and you try one of those authoritarian strategies I talked to you about, obey me, I'm the adult, what I say goes, you live in my house, it's my rules. If you do any of that, this child will escalate. It will get worse. This is good information. So if you haven't ever heard about something like an intense brain child, you want to know this because it can shape how you parent and how you don't parent. there is a certain level, there are certain styles of parenting, such as permissive parenting, where we're so worn down by the controlling and demanding behaviors that we're just like, fine, do it on your own. And you let go of boundaries, or you're not sure how to get through because you're so exhausted. That permissive parenting is not going to be a good match for a child who has intense brain wiring. And I said already, authoritarian parenting, if we're looking at the pendulum swing or the spectrum here, you will obey me and you get sterner and firmer, and you become this angry person this angry parent when you were never an angry person. Like this, you want to know that when you are raising a child who has more of these big feelings and big reactions, or I think about even myself growing up, I, as a 10th grader, would black out before school every day in high school. And I got diagnosed with a social anxiety disorder. But I would literally lay down on the kitchen floor in the morning when I put my bread in the toaster, and the lights would go black and I could still hear sounds. And then a matter of minutes later, the lights, I would start seeing them with my eyes again, and I'd stand up and my toast would be cold, and I'd put peanut butter on it, wash it down with a glass of milk, and drive to school with my dad. So there was a lot of fire in my brain that manifested as inward behavior rather than externalized fight behavior. Okay, and I see you, Shanna. Thank you for that in the chat box here. And so I'm seeing now also by your comment about some of these are the things that happens at a different household with a different caregiver that your child has, or a different parent that they have. And the good news is that when you have these tools, what we're doing is we're building relationship with your child, because they're like ducklings where they imprint on the grown up around them. So things might not be great, and that's going to be their relationship with the other parent at the other house, which is, of course, devastating at times, very hard to see. It's heart-wrenching and causes us grief and sadness and anger. But what we can do is we can empower the relationship that we have with our child. Kind of like I said, so I'm saying kids are like ducklings where they imprint on the style around them. So if they have a great teacher and you're like, man, they just like get in that rhythm, this is exactly what they need. You're starting to notice some of the tools that work for them at school may work for them at home. We just want to know, what does that look like in parenting, right? Or vice versa. Maybe there are some things that teachers doing and they're like, you got to give them consequences at home, and they're being strict and consequence oriented at school. And it's like, wait a minute, maybe we actually need to build more relationship. And what we do, what my offer to you is that the best way to change your kids' behavior from a parenting perspective is to monitor your fire. So you want to know, what does your fire in the brain look like? So you've probably been thinking about multiple people. You're thinking about what your kid's fire looks like. Got it. Feel free to type that in the chat box if you want. And like you had posted as well, what happens at dad's house, a different house than you're living in, is what does your fire look like? Do you tend to yell? Does a co-parent tend to do that? Do they get harsh with their consequences, lock kids in rooms or out of the house, threaten to take away screens forever or cancel holidays, family trips, like things that aren't really going to happen? Is there more flight? Is there like, I can't do this, and there's walking away and you forget or don't know to say, I'm overwhelmed and I'll come back? Do you just check out and tune out, and that's your flee behavior? Like, that's fine. Or is it permissive? Do you have more of the fawning, like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And you're like encouraging and persuading and bribing and trying to make it better. And in the meantime, there's just all these feelings, and now you're worn out because you're constantly trying to help your kid not have these feelings or make it go away or stop. So thinking about, what does fire look like at your house? I feel like there's one more thing I want to share, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you have insights already, you're having some ahas or questions, type them in the chat box. So I'm going to scroll back and invite people to ask questions based on who has posted first. And that's not to bribe you, it's just to keep myself organized and invite you to share. So when we're talking about what's happening beneath challenging childhood behavior, I want you to understand how powerful you are. That kids and grown-ups, we all have mirror neurons in our brain, and these reflect the state another person is in. So what this means, to really make it have it make sense, is when Charlie's melting down, this is the first time in my adult life. I was only 22 years old. I graduated really early from grad school. I was on a fast track. I remember looking down at him and like I was sweating and I wanted to give up and I was filled with rage. And I thought, this is what my dad talked about when he said, I'm boiling inside. I'm sorry that I'm laughing. It's not funny when you're in the moment, but I get it, right? Like Charlie's upset reaction triggered my fight response. It triggered the rage inside of me. And so mirror neurons work in two ways. It's going to influence your child's behavior is going to influence your downstairs brain and reaction, and you might find yourself doing things that you don't want to be doing. But your reaction also has the ability to trigger their mirror neurons. So if you're loud and big, this is like enraging the already barking dog. How do we stay away from threatening and enraging? How do we calm the fire in the situation? We calm ourselves first. And it's such a powerful starting point. It's not all of it, that I literally, though, printed these postcards that say calm body, calm voice, calm face. So when the question I always get is, so what do I do during those moments of meltdown? Well, first you breathe and you calm your body and you calm your voice and you calm your face. And these are the things you may have done at certain times in your kid's life, like when they were a baby and you're rocking them. We're trying to calm them and have soft body and soft voice and slow things down. The same thing is true for our 12-year-old, except we're not rocking and we're not using cooing noises with them. So when you can control or become aware that you're getting triggered and what you do is going to create a mirror for how your child recovers, we understand how influential we are. Let me say that again. So when you know that your response models the pathway for how your child should recover, this puts the baton in your hand. If I'm thinking about like those races into the Olympics, like here is the baton. I, Samantha, am handing it to you to understand that if you want your child to take breaths, then when they have fire in the brain, you need to model taking breaths. If you want your child to speak more respectfully instead of swearing or name calling, when your child has fire in the brain, you want to monitor the fact that you're not swearing or name calling loudly or under your breath. So this is where we can begin influencing our kids' behavior. And I told you, like, this is a super tender space to be in. So if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, she's speaking to me, thank goodness. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. And there's some really light things that we can do too. So we want to learn to calm ourselves in a way that feels supported. And, I'm not the person who I think about going on walks with other moms and we're talking about something that's hard for us and like, oh, don't worry, you're still a good person. It's okay. And I feel better for the moment. And then the next day I wake up and it happens again. I'm like, I'm not that good of a person because I did it again. Like that's what we do in this space is we say, you know what, it's okay. There's no judgment here. And let's put in the right tool for the moment because I find there's 8 tools. Let me share this with you so you visually see it. There are 8 tools that when you do them in the right order, it starts calming your kid's fire in the brain. So, and most families need 3 to 5 of these tools. And this is the whole structure of the Mad to Glad blueprint. That we work on these downstairs brain as parents. We calm the fire in ourselves, and then we learn how to calm our kids' fire. We avoid fire starters like shaming, or with little kids, would you like to put your shoes on? Would you like to put your, like asking questions rather than it's time to put your shoes on. Like these repetitive things can create more fire in the brain. So when you know what to do, they make change quite quickly. And then we move our way up the ladder from downstairs brain to midbrain skills of acknowledging kids' emotions so they don't have the volume turned up so high. They don't have to like yell and scream and cry and kick and blame you and attack you. And they don't have to do all of that in order to be heard. And we can build a positive bond. And after that, we layer in upstairs skills, positive discipline and boundaries and repair strategies and following routines. But we don't start there Because if we start there, we're trying to put in all of these good things like positive discipline and family meetings and picture routines. But in the meantime, if we're adding fuel to the fire, we have to work really hard for them to sink in because we haven't created collaboration with our child. So one more tool I want to share with you is that, as you're reflecting on your parenting approach and your kids' behavior, I want you to also think about how you think about your kids' behavior influence your parenting. Stop for a second and ask that again. So if you think your child's behavior is manipulation, how is that going to influence your parenting? And this is an all play. Type something. I'm not saying you think this about your kid, but let's play this together. If you think your kid's behavior is manipulation, how is that going to cause somebody to parent, do you think? Yeah, you've been thinking about this, how your thoughts of your child affect your behavior. So if you think your kid's manipulative, if you're a fight response person, you're gonna snap your fingers at them and be like, "Nuh-uh, you're not controlling me." But if you match them there, what you heard about the intense brain child is it's actually going to escalate their fire. Or if you think your child's manipulating you and you have more flight or freeze, like, oh, I got a disconnect response. Oh, they're manipulating me again. You might walk away. So again, in both of these situations, you're creating disconnection rather than secure attachment with them. Yeah, that's right, Trisha. You'll see them and treat them as a deceptive and controlling child. That's right. And so now this language or this way we see our kids, the adult you language to the kid becomes a child's inner I language. You are controlling and deceptive. And like, well, I'm controlling and deceptive. I'm going to steal and lie. Right? So we have a really powerful influence on our children. There was a parent that I worked with, a mom and a dad, and they came to me because their 9-year-old Devin was angry, they called him. And I said, well, tell me about Devin. And they said, oh, sure. I mean, he punches holes in the wall. And we've taken him to an individual therapist, a family therapist, alternative therapies like acupuncturist and chiropractor, and he still punches holes. Mom said just the other day he punched a hole in the wall. And I said, well, what was happening? And she said, oh, I don't know. He was riding the school bus home with his sister, and I made a special gluten-free and dairy-free meal because he has food sensitivities, and it took me 45 minutes. And when I said it's time to eat, he didn't want to play. He wanted to keep playing a screen. And I asked, well, what did you do? Well, I said, Devin, your sister's waiting for you at the table. The food's going to get cold. You need to come and eat right now. And she said, I went to where he was playing his game, and he paused and he put his arms over his chest. He's like, I'm not eating that. I want to order pizza. And Mom said, I know it's your favorite food. I spent all this time making this special meal. Come on, I'm not ordering pizza. Let's go. And she reached down to pick him up and things by the arm, and that escalated from there. And he threw the remote against the wall and it put a dent in it. And I asked her, well, what did you say next? And she said, well, I told them, we're having an open house this weekend, and now we're going to have to somebody fix that. And contractors cost money. So that's coming out of your allowance, which means she went and she went and she went to tell me the rest of this sentence. Whew, we hear ourselves in this story, don't we? Because we do this. We overteach with logic and we use a lot of upstairs brain skills when what's happening is something emotionally, and it looks like our kid is defiant, not listening, doesn't like the food, wants pizza, doing the same old thing, trying to control. But really, I asked Mom, I said, well, tell me what else is happening in Devin's life. And she said, oh, well, we're moving house in 6 weeks. And so we told the kids, you have a choice. You can stay in your current school and finish out the year, or you can move to the new school district early to get a jump on meeting some of the other kids. And his sister decided to get a jump and move to the new school. And it was her last day today at the old school, but Devin decided to stay. And so she said, Devin's got, he's known as the class clown. He gets sent to the principal's office 1 or 2 times a week. He never gets invited to birthday parties. He gets remedial reading services because of a disability. So he gets pulled out of class. And she said, the reason I made a special meal that Devin would like is because he's been telling me for years that his favorite part of the day is riding the school bus home with his sister. So when you hear that, how do you feel like that? Like type in the chat box, all you grown-ups on the call. What would be other ways, other feelings Devin is, you would describe his feelings? Mm-hmm. Right. So then how do you respond so that doesn't make it feel like you're being permissive? I mean, that's the building of the 3 to 5 tools to learn not to add fuel to the fire and how to have boundaries. So your child learns that listening is required and we make space for their feelings. And you got it. Yeah, that Devin's sad, missing his sister, feeling alone, maybe hopeless. So where this starts giving us a glimpse, yep, Connie, connection lost, sad. It starts giving us a glimpse that if how we see and label our kids' behavior is going to influence how we parent. Now, I don't know about you, but if my kid is ticked off and screaming at me, I'm mad. I'm like, no, 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 don't boss me around. I mean, instinctively, obviously, I have a lot of tools and skills that I practice, but instinctively, I'm like, don't boss me around. And I heard that voice for the first time a year ago when he was 3, and I was like, oh, that's a trigger for me. Don't boss me around. Got it. But if he's yelling and screaming because he's sad, I'm right there. That's like my people pleasing Enneagram 2 helper personality. Like if you're sad, I can be there for you. And so one of the things that you learn to do is you learn to ask, how is my kid feeling right now? And layering in some tools to acknowledge it in a way where they're receptive to it. And that what that does from a brain perspective, this is our connection part, our middle brain, limbic system, is it turns the volume down. It says, oh, like in Devin's case, he's like, you finally get me. His body language would soften when his mom would practice this strategy. And he wasn't like, great, thanks, I'll come eat dinner. I'll do whatever you say. But he would say things like, you know what, I am upset. This doesn't seem fair. And then the conversation would start and he'd talk about the things that were hard for him, which you never know what's going to be. So there's an invitation to get really good at letting your kid have their feelings and not trying to rush them through them. Because when they get to process them, it's like a pressure valve release. It's like this big, too tight rubber tire that you let a little air out and you're like, oh, okay, it rides a little bit softer now if you're a mountain biker, like I am. Or my sisters do acupuncture. It's like, okay, sometimes I have a dairy sensitivity and I can go in there and they'll literally do needles on my digestive point. I'm like, oh, it looks like a little deflated balloon now. I like that. So like there's a pressure valve release so that things can soften instead of being stretched. This is that feeling when you're walking on eggshells, waiting for your child to go off the rails emotionally or behaviorally. Like how can we release some of that pressure and create space so that we don't always have to bring them to outside practitioners, but we, as the parent, become the person our child connects with, trusts, and relies on without it draining our energy. And in fact, we feel really gifted by that work. All right. So I promised that I would talk about what's happening beneath kids' behavior. So one of them is that there's fire in the brain. And in the parenting world, I mean, there can be lots of reasons for fire in the brain in the first place, but there are things we do as parents that fuel the fire. So I talked about the strategy to not add fuel to the fire with the calm mantra. And then we touched briefly on noticing how your child is feeling, because that's going to influence your parenting and how you respond to them. And so the plug-in strategy is understanding and getting really good at acknowledging their feelings without trying to overteach them logically and using upstairs brain skills. So with that, the floor is open. I saw quite a few questions sent in to me. I'm going to look at them on another screen here. I always like to have these tools shared on a gathering call because it's often what's missing in families that are raising kids like this. And so it gives us a starting point from all my research and synthesization, synthesize, I don't know what that word is, synthesis and testing over the years with a variety of parents. So if you have a question, turn on your video or raise your hand icon or type it in the chat box. We've got just under 15 minutes or a little longer if you want me to stay, since I know you joined this call for a certain reason. What question might you have? Trisha, I like it. So validating their concerns and feelings in the moment is where to start, and then what's next? Well, I'm going to give you the short answer and then the long answer. Um, so what you may not realize is that in order for this to work, you're actually practicing two skills. The first skill is you're regulating your own reactivity. Because if there's fire in our brain and we're worried or afraid of how our kid's going to turn out, or their actual physical violence and behavior in the moment, then we're not going to, then there's fire in our brain and we can't actually do problem solving and emotional connection strategies with them. And that's what's important for helping them feel safe. So we start with calm and we acknowledge their feelings and we let the storm pass. And then eventually we get to the point, and I know there's like a lot of variation on this, so it's a general answer. But then what we do is we always also get to have boundaries. So in Devin's case of him being really upset, mom and I would practice scripting along the lines of, you're really upset. And she would listen to him and say, I am upset because you're always telling me I only get so much time on screen time, and you never asked my permission in the first place if I wanted to eat that. And so she would listen and then she would reflect it again. Okay, so this feels unfair to you. And then he would blame and have some verbal attacks back. And she would think like, okay, as this evolves, his emotions change slightly, but not a lot, right? Like you're really upset or you're really frustrated. And I follow this rule of thumb of 3 times of acknowledging feelings. So Dr. Ross Green, who has a collaborative problem solving model in the schools, talks about, says that an empathy conversation lasts 10 to 12 minutes on average. So if you're present in the space with a child and you help them process their feelings, you get to the point where you see them soften or you see them receptive again, and that shows fire in the brain is done and now or has gone down. And now you use the word and like with Devin, and it is time to eat dinner. And what you may not be, what might be unimaginable and hard to believe right now is that even in stories like Devin's example, by practicing this sequence, what happened was within, it was 2 to 6 weeks, I can't remember what it was exactly, they had fewer meltdowns and big violent expressions because he was learning how to process his feelings and his mom wasn't stepping into the situation and triggering it more by her saying like, don't be so disrespectful to me. Why are you always doing this? So it's a matter of then saying like, and now it's time to eat. So what you learn to do, even in my programs, is you learn to build in one tool a week over the 8 weeks, because then we get to the point of and having boundaries, which is actually in my 5th week of the program. Like we're building relationship and trust and having calming fire in the brain for our kids. Now we can do boundaries and ask more of them. But if you don't have those foundational pieces, it doesn't even matter what's next. And do we do things like repair strategies if they've hurt the other sibling or been disrespectful to it? Yeah, of course we do, but not on the early end when our first goal is to rewire the brain patterning so there's not so much fire. And once you do that well, now all of these other strategies start to stick and we get into a space called collaboration where your child is working together with you. Okay, so looking at next questions. I see you, Connie. Okay, so your 6 and 4-year-old are constantly arguing about everything and everything is a competition. Now, and let me read the other questions. Is there too much time that can pass for them to calm down to address before something? Is there too much time that can pass before something that action needs to be taken? I think you're trying to help me understand with your parentheses, but I'm getting confused. Is there too much time that can pass for them? I'm gonna let you type that again. Type that differently for me. Okay. So Trisha, you're saying what you learned over time exactly is let the storm pass. It sucks there's so much cursing, but on his part, but he never stops if I ask. Yeah, yeah. And so we build in some things about positive discipline through if my program ever felt like a match for you, so that over time there is less cursing. But you're right, trying to logic your way through and teach him why cursing is not okay in this moment isn't actually going to shift the behavior. Um, I'm going to move to Connie's comment about everything being a competition. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a space also then where, let me pull this up again, where when we're looking at what are the tools that are right for your family, once you learn these 8 tools, you're going to be the best identifier of what makes the most sense in the situation. So Connie, since I know you know some of these tools, you don't have to answer now, but I'm going to walk this through so it's relevant to the entire group of people, which is if there's a lot of competition and bickering, number one, are we avoiding fire starters? Are we adding fuel to the fire? Now, I know you as a calm and I know you as a grounded person, so I'm going to guess that this you're doing really pretty good at. Number two is we look at how are we doing with building trust and relationships so the kids feel special and important. There's multiple children in the household, so we do variations on this so that it's short snippets. So, is it competition for your attention or is it just with each other? Do we need happy chemical bonding time? Are we labeling feelings rather than just like, this is what I said, this is what you have to do? And then also things like we're probably getting more into positive discipline and conflict resolution strategy, Connie. They can do it at 4 and 6. So I would encourage you to look at the parent workbook and the circle back technique. Because if they're really competitive, then there might need to be something about the rules of arguing together and skilled training on how they can work it out. So I'm going to refer you to that, and maybe I get to see you on a different call coming up here, and we can talk about it more deeply. Thank you for posting that. And then let me check chat box again before I do a little wrap up. And if any of you want to know more about my programs, I'm happy to share. Okay, I got you. So if they're upset and need to calm down, how much time is too much time? Sometimes I don't have an hour to wait it out. Yeah, good question. When we can share time with them and give them time, do. If you can be delayed and it's not gonna be super, it's not gonna put a black mark on someone's record. Like if you don't go to OT 3 times in a row, they're canceling you, like if you can be a little bit delayed to maybe you have a place of worship and you're like, okay, I can be 15 minutes late to this. It's embarrassing, but they can be late. I absolutely can't be late to OT or they're gonna cancel. So, knowing that if you can give time, then do. It's the being with them in their feelings calmly, where you're role modeling and your mirror neurons are showing them how to recover. That's really valuable. So it's not just like, oh, look, I'm with them and their feelings went away. You're being present with them to give them a map on how to recover. And there are times where you're like, I can't do this. I mean, there's times with me too. I'm like, oh, guess what, 3.5-year-old? I'm picking you up and putting you in your car seat. Now that doesn't apply to every kid because it depends on how old they are. But there are times where it's like, nope, I'm gonna take your clothes and your shoes and put them in a bag and help move you into the car to get you to school and you can get dressed in the car. And not as a way of being shaming or authoritarian, but more as an example to demonstrate to you, you don't always have to wait it out. So when we're looking to create more peace at home, there's a balance, there's a power balance. And we want your kid to feel empowered and have a voice and know what the routine and rhythm is with discipline, with routines, with how you're going to react, what's acceptable and what's not. But we want you to feel, and we want you to feel empowered, that your child does listen, that you have tools to enforce boundaries. But you're also empowered because you know positive ways of building their emotional intelligence so that they can get back into regulation. So, um, yeah, and sometimes it's about avoiding the next task. Yeah, so those are the things I talk more deeply about after, if it feels like being in a program of mine would be a good match. Now, some of you might have just joined this call because you were interested in this call. Thank you. I'm so glad you came. I hope this was useful. We'll post it on YouTube for the replay if you want to listen to it again or share it with somebody. But some of you joined this call I saw in your form because you want more tools. So I'm going to describe what my parenting program in October looks like now. If you're someone who wants to read about this privately, I'll send it an email. We have it programmed to go out to you in about 10 minutes. So feel free to say au revoir and maybe you'll read that on your own time if it feels like a match. But for those of you who are here because you wanted to learn more about my program, I'm happy to share about that now. So really what it is I have a 6-month support program that teaches you these 8 tools step by step. And we start on October 23rd. You get 1 tool a week to watch on your own time. And then we meet for 75 minutes on Wednesdays as a small group to talk about how do you apply the tool given your child's age, given your family makeup, given some of the diagnoses that might be happening in your family or your family's schedule. And so if that, what happens there is you start building these tools as we go so that you don't just hear them one time and then they're done. You get to apply it for a week and come back and ask questions. We layer our tools in from the downstairs brain up so that by the end of the 8-week, you have tools and change that sticks. It's not just, oh, my kid doesn't know how to talk about feelings, so let's just do that. Most families need a combination of 3 to 5 tools to feel confident that they can navigate any situation. And when you have the tools, they follow you for a lifetime. So you can apply it with children of other ages, with your existing child as they go through developmental stages. And I remember a mom who started working with me when her kid was 7, and she said, Samantha, she called me 3 times over the next 10 years, and she would give me updates. And she said, Samantha, the 3 tools that followed us all along the way were me calming my own fire and not like shaming my child for the things that she was talking about or bringing into the circumstance or the situation. Number 2 was having family meetings. So we always had a regular touch point to weather the different storms. And number 3, she said, I'm really flexible and I want to give my child a voice. And I learned how to set boundaries and have some positive discipline so that my child knew when no was no without me having to yell or scream or over consequence or argue with her. And she said, those 3 things I knew how to, you taught me to do them when she was 7. I still use them when she called me. She said when she called me when her kid was 11. And then I think she called me when her child was 16. And then again at 17, that they still last and help you navigate some of those difficult times. So with this 8-week step-by-step program, you're learning 1 tool a week. You get live coaching calls with me in that group setting online. And then you get access to twice monthly calls in addition to that for 6 months. And this is so that you get more time. We call them the Ask Samantha calls to say, I missed that tool because somebody was sick. And when someone's sick in your house, everyone's down for like a week or maybe even 2 weeks. And in the wintertime, sometimes even a month. So it gives us a chance to go back to those tools and brush them up or say, I learned this one tool. Can I get a repetition now that the season has changed? Because I want to support you for 2 seasons. And the beautiful thing is that when you do them, you're not alone. You're going to hear stories like you're seeing in the chat box, except we'll be on video and get to have actual conversations. You hear people's stories of they grew up with a yelling parent and they became a yelling parent, and you start noticing how they're using the tools differently and feeling empowered, and it becomes encouraging where you form relationships and friendships from these calls and feel like you're not alone. So I love the gathering call this time of year, because if you decide to sign up for that October 23rd start date, but you sign up now, you get access to twice monthly Ask Samantha calls now. So we have another call still in September. We have a call in October. If you were hiring me privately, it'd be $300 for a single 1-hour call. So you are gifted those so that if you're already feeling like you need help, you don't have to limp into October, but you'll have some pep in your step. Oh, you'll have already gotten started and gotten a couple of these tools under your belt because we give you those pre-recorded modules right away as well. So if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to share more. I had a chat box. Somebody's said they're going to listen to the replay, so I'll comment on this private message. So as far as what the pricing is of the program, it's $1,800 for the 6 months. And of course, we have payment plans. Some families use flex spending or HSA dollars to pay for parent coaching because it qualifies, not insurance, but flex and HSA. And if your child has some sort of grant funding from Children's Mental Health or CADI waivers because of an autism diagnosis or something else, parent coaching and this program also qualifies for that. I have relationships with children's mental health agencies and autism agencies throughout Minnesota. So if you're interested in that, one of the best next steps that you can do is to, if you need to run something by me, you can book a call with me at samanthamo.com/parents, and it will also be in your email. So I do a free 30-minute one-on-one Zoom call. I have you fill out a background form where you share your biggest challenges, and then we talk about them. And we just decide together if this program is a good fit, because this is really for parents who are in a space where they're wanting to make some changes on their end and they're able to make some of those changes. So if that's something you wanted to talk about, you can book a call, or you can register for the program right through the link and get early bird access to those two Ask Samantha calls. And so I'm seeing what you're saying, that you've never been angry until you became a mom, which breaks your heart. And I mean, hand on my heart, it's the tender space of these calls where I have the privilege of hearing things like this, and I want to tell you, you're not alone. That this parenting space is where a lot of people stumble into anger and rage for the first time. And so we work through that. We work through what are the tools so that you have less anger? How do we work through and grow you and develop you to be the parent that you've wanted to always be, which is often the person that you were before you became a parent. And you absolutely have what it takes to bring laughter and enjoyment into your family. And one of the biggest surprises people will say, on the final evaluation, there's two. One is, wow, I didn't realize how effective this would be at getting my co-parent and I on the same page. So if that's a circumstance in your family, that often happens, because we talk about the science and the emotions and feelings behind things. So depending on how you're wired, we want to know why this is important to build the value for changing behavior, because changing ourselves is hard. It's just like, I joined a Beachbody fitness program. I'm like, oh, if I were doing this on my own, I would do 3 workouts a week. But I'm in this women's group 5 to 7 a.m., 5 mornings a week, and I'd probably work out 4 to 5 times a week now. And I've been doing it for 3 months. And that's the idea behind programs like this. It's not to give you less attention, it's to give you accountability, reminder, and a loving space to help you follow through with that thing that you wanted to commit to. So the second thing, other than co-parenting on the same page that I hear, and is that change happens surprisingly quickly. So most families make progress in their first 2 weeks, because when you can calm the fire in the brain, your child has access to their own problem solving and self-regulation skills. So what I do is I help you get really clear by taking you through specific transformational parenting exercises, what needs to happen in your family in order to help calm that fire in the brain. And then there's more laughter and joy all around. And now you have the tools to share with the other helpers in your kid's life, like the babysitters or teachers or caregivers or other therapists and professionals. So, are there any more comments that you want to make before we wrap up today? It's been lovely to see all of the interaction in the chat box. Thank you. All right, you might be typing, but I also don't want to cut you off. I don't want to go too fast either. So thank you for being here. It is truly a pleasure to share my life's work with you and everybody who caught this replay. And samanthamo.com/parents has all the details for booking a free call with me, for signing up for my October cohort. And we'll post this replay, like I said, so that you can rewatch it or share it with a friend or one of your child's therapists or teachers to help them understand what might be happening with the behaviors. Thank you so much. Take good care. Bye.